The Guadalcanal campaign was the United States' first major land offensive of the Second World War. Though the Japanese Navy had received a crushing blow in early June of 1942 at the Battle of Midway, Japan had already begun extending their outer defensive perimeter in the South Pacific. That included the Solomon Islands, and specifically the island of Guadalcanal and the smaller surrounding islands. By May of 1942, they already had a seaplane base on Tulagi, and in early July began construction of a large airfield on the northeast coast of Guadalcanal. These advanced positions would protect their large base at Rabaul, as well as threaten Allied shipping and communication lines with Australia. In many ways, the US wasn't prepared to make such an offensive. Organized Allied supply chains were still being developed in the Pacific, and US troops were still being mobilized, trained, and adequately equipped. There was also competition for resources with the European theater, but it was imperative to deny Japan use of such key bases for their potential further expansion east. The 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions were some of the first combat-ready troops activated and deployed in the Pacific. Their amphibious assault and occupation of Guadalcanal in August of 1942 would be their baptism by fire. They not only learned how ferociously the Japanese fought, but also endured suffering unique to prolonged combat in a tropical rainforest. This video is part 1 of a series that explores what it was really like for those Marines, and what they experienced during those first weeks on Guadalcanal. In the early morning of August 7, 1942, thousands of young Marines were awakened and served their ceremonial breakfast of steak and eggs. Many then went topside to watch the deafening naval bombardment of Guadalcanal before receiving orders to prepare to disembark. They climbed down over the side of their troop transports on cargo nets and carefully timed their steps onto the bobbing landing craft below. As they headed toward shore, they anticipated a life and death struggle of close combat on the beach. A nervous 17-year-old Sidney Phillips of Howe Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, carefully loaded his Springfield rifle and slid around into the chamber, determined to get at least one enemy before being wiped out with the rest of his boat. They braced as their craft skidded on the beach and charged out as soon as the front ramp dropped. They were ready for a fight, but were met with the first wave of Marines laughing at them while opening coconuts. There were no Japanese defenders in the area at all. They had fled inland into the jungle after the heavy bombardment. The Marines rallied and began into the jungle towards their objectives with the help of crude maps. They were immediately affected by the extreme heat and stagnant humid air in the dense overgrowth. Carrying 60-pound packs in the oppressive heat quickly extinguished the earlier lighthearted attitudes. Each Marine had only a single canteen, so they practiced water discipline, but their dry food and constant uphill trek only hastened their thirst. Many were dehydrated and totally exhausted when they dug in for the first night. The next morning, while supplies were being unloaded and the beach fortified, Japanese torpedo bombers were spotted low over the water, headed towards the U.S. convoy. The transport ship, the USS George F. Elliott, which brought the 1,300 men of the 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, opened up with anti-aircraft fire to meet the inbound Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. One Betty closed in on their starboard side, absorbing several hits before it suddenly slammed into the ship. A massive fire quickly spread to the supplies destined for the Marines on shore. The crew was unable to contain it, and she sank later that evening on August 8th. Jim Young, a fellow mortarman from Sid Phillips' platoon, recalled being strafed by Japanese planes starting the first day on Guadalcanal, and for many weeks after. They came swooping in so low that the Marines could see the pilots turning their heads to look down at them, often with smiles on their faces. The Marines couldn't do much but curse them as they flew by. The airfield was captured the second day and named Henderson Field after a Marine pilot that died during the Battle of Midway. The following weeks on Guadalcanal revolved around finishing and keeping the airfield in U.S. hands, as well as repairing it after frequent Japanese air raids and later naval bombardments. That second night, Marines of H-21 were bivouacked on a hill overlooking the water. Unbeknownst to them, much of their naval support fleet was already withdrawing, along with their aircraft carriers. In the distance, a bright rumbling naval battle flashed like a violent thunderstorm, and they cheered as ships exploded brightly in the dark. They assumed their Navy boys were winning. The Battle of Savo Island, as it became known, was a disastrous defeat for the Allied fleet. Over 1,000 sailors died. 4 heavy cruisers were sunk, and 3 other ships were damaged. The Japanese naval attack totally caught the Allied fleet off guard, and forced their remaining ships to withdraw early from the islands, with most of the supplies still on board. They wouldn't return for 6 weeks. The Marines were on their own. Every man stranded on Guadalcanal wondered if they were expendable. Would Uncle Sam come back for them, or would this be yet another repeat of what happened in the Philippines, on Wake Island, or Guam? They were surrounded. Japan had total naval and air supremacy and means of resupplying and reinforcing their troops. But the US did have one lifeline, the airfield, and the Japanese would throw everything they have to pry it from their grasps.